Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to my presentation. I'm sure you've had a long day of presentations, but hopefully this is a little bit different than what you'll be getting at some of the other presentations. So my name is Diane Melville, and I'm here to talk to you about paying for college, but not in the sort of typical way that you're used to. We're not going to talk about, get into the details of the FAFSA or get into the deep details of the CSS profile. What we're really going to talk about is the right way to really think about paying for college. So we're going to dive in and I'm going to go over a little bit about what we're going to talk about. So my goal is to give you the advice you most likely won't hear anywhere else. Not that you won't see it online, not that your counselor may not have told you this, but there are some things that happened when I was going to college that I really wish that someone would have told me, and no one did. And so I kind of had to figure that out for myself. So the agenda really is about telling you a little bit about me and then sort of diving a little bit into the reality of what college is like now. It's a little bit different than when our parents went. It's a little bit different than when our brothers and sisters went. And then I'm going to give you a little bit of background on the philosophy you should have when you're thinking about your college education, which, again, very different than what it was even 5 or 6 years ago. We're going to talk about majors, how to choose them, how to think about them. These are things you should be thinking about now, and surprisingly, it does not only affect how you pay for college, but the value of your degree afterwards. We're going to get to the basics of financial aid. I'll cover as much as I possibly can about some tips and tricks about things you're supposed to do when you're applying for financial aid, and then we'll get into my area of specialty, which is scholarships. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about me. So my background is I grew up in Miami, Florida. I grew up in a relatively poor background, and I was a first-generation college hopeful. So I didn't have any family, any friends that went to college. I really had to figure it out for myself. And because my family was so low income, they basically left it up to me to figure out how I was going to pay for it. So I just started applying for scholarships. I applied for hundreds of scholarships, literally over 350 individual private scholarships, and won enough to pay for my entire college education. So that was my sort of crash course on paying for college. After that, I ended up going to community college, which we'll talk a little bit about in this presentation, some advantages there for some of you who may be thinking about that as an option, and then transferred into some of the nation's best schools. I was accepted into schools like Harvard, Cornell, and ultimately chose Babson College in Wellesley, Massachusetts. And so I wrote a book about my experiences with community college. It's called The Community College Advantage, and it's essentially a toolkit to figure out how to get the most out of a community college education. So community college is a little bit different than what it used to be. People used to think about community college as where the slackers went, but now it's really a springboard for achieving some things in education that you might not be able to do straight out of high school. So if you're interested in community college, or you want to learn more about it, or you know somebody that's interested in attending community college, this book has everything that you would need, and it really details all of my experiences and things learned. So I'm coming to you today from SALT, which I am the scholarship and community college expert on SALT's blog. So if you want more information about scholarships, community college, how to apply for scholarships, you can find me on their blog, and I publish things weekly, which will be really fun. But SALT in general is sort of a money management platform. They teach you all sorts of things from student loans, filling out the FAFSA, all the way to managing your credit score and figuring out how to become an adult financially. It's a really great resource, and I love working with them. They've been fantastic, and I highly recommend it. This is a little bit about SALT. This is their website. They have a blog. They have really fun tools. They have lots of great resources if you're interested in money management, which you should be as a college student, because that's what it all comes down to. So I'm going to start on a little darker note, which is the reality of attending college nowadays. And unfortunately, the bachelor's degree doesn't really mean much on its own. And what I mean by that is it's not the same thing that it used to be, where you graduated from high school, you went to college, and there were all these jobs waiting for you at the end of it. And where you had a bachelor's degree and suddenly you were in this upper echelon of society where people, looked up to you, you can get these amazing opportunities, you learn so much. Clearly, that's a little bit different now, right? There's about 26% of people in the United States have a bachelor's degree, and there's about 54% of them that are unemployed, right? So we have this issue where the degree isn't really automatically meaning anything. And so what I advise people to do is think about it. Don't just go from high school to college. Really think about if college is the right thing for you. And if it's not, or if it's something that you think you just have to do, some of the things that I'm going to tell you now are something that you should really consider or think about. So we have 30% of people in the United States have a bachelor's degree, right? And that includes, we've got some janitors, we've got some bartenders, we've got some restaurant owners, we have truck drivers. We have people that you wouldn't necessarily instantly think of when you think of a bachelor's degree. And unfortunately, those are the people who sort of went to college, maybe got a degree that they weren't all that interested in, didn't really have a plan, graduated, unfortunately, with a ton of debt, and then find themselves in a job that doesn't necessarily require a bachelor's degree. And so I want to put these numbers in front of you, and I want to talk to you about this really seriously, because you're going to end up in a not so fun situation if you just sort of run the gambit and do this. So the average student loan debt nowadays is about $29,400. So if you really do the math and you think about that, you're going to end up owing about $40,000. So remember that 54% I told you about? Well, that's recent college graduates. That's people who are just graduating from college. I think the number they use is about 3 years for that, are unemployed or underemployed, meaning the job they end up getting doesn't even require a bachelor's degree. So let's put all that together, and then we're in a situation where after you graduate from college, you're paying $338,000 a month for the next 10 years for something that took you 4 years to do, and you only had a 46% chance of getting a job. And so that's a really expensive proposition, and not one that you should just do automatically, right? These are things that you should think about. What I suggest for people is that you should go to college because you have a game plan. You should go to college because you intend and you really think you need that bachelor's degree in order to pursue the line of work that you want to pursue. And you should go to college that is the cheapest. A lot of kids will sort of get a little bit panicky about the amount of student debt that they'll have to take on. And some students will even think that it's just something that everyone does and that they should do it, right? Taking out $30,000 worth of debt is not something that you should do just because everyone else does it and it's perfectly fine, right? This is a really serious issue, right? We're talking about a lot of money. And so if you think about it in terms of opportunity, let's say you graduate from college and you now have that $338 payment a month. If there's an opportunity, let's say like an unpaid internship or a really low paying, sort of entry level job, but that will be the springboard for you to pursue your career, you have a really hard time taking that job because you might not even be able to make the minimum student loan payment on that debt. And so your options are starting to shrink and shrink. And what happens with a lot of students and people that I know, friends of mine, they end up taking any job that will basically cover their minimum payments and then try desperately to find experience on the side to do what they love. And so you have people with $60,000, $70,000, $80,000 worth of debt working 2 or 3 jobs just trying to keep up with the minimum payment. And so I always say just say no to ridiculous amounts of debt. And that should be the bottom line, no ifs, ands, or buts about it. So now that we've got that out of the way, and I'm sorry to start it on such a dark note, but I find too many times people are just sort of checking the boxes and going through, and then they graduate and they have all this debt and they're wondering why no one ever told them. You don't have to go to college if you don't think it's the right thing to do, right? This is essentially your life. You get to decide what you do. You get to make the decisions. You get to think about it and decide what's the best for you, right? I had a friend who, instead of going to college, they graduated from high school. They reached out to a company and asked them if they can work for them at the lowest paying job possible for 4 years to learn all there was to learn about that company. At the end of the 4 years, well, not even at the end of the 4 years, in the middle of the 4 years, they were able to get a promotion. They got a better paying job. They had tons of experience. And if you looked at that person's resume and what they have accomplished compared to the average college graduate, they did a lot more. Not saying that's the path for everyone, but that person thought about it. They took a step back and said, hey, I could learn more from my career by just working for these next 4 years in a company that's highly prestigious than I could if I just sort of checked the boxes and went to college. So it's not supposed to dissuade you, but it is supposed to broaden your horizons a little bit and think about these before you do it. So let's get into a little bit of the philosophy when you do decide like, hey, I really do need to go to college. I want to go to college. It's something that I've had my eye on for a long time. How do you do this effectively? How do you pay for it? How do you wind up graduating on top as opposed to graduating with a ton of debt? And so it comes down to 2 things, which is choosing the school based on financial aid, and I'll go into how to do that, and then choosing a major that has job prospects or doing things while you're in college to increase what those job prospects will be. And so I want to talk a little bit about this notion of expensive schools versus what we consider cheaper schools or schools that aren't as expensive. There's this misconception that whatever the tuition or the total cost of attendance is for the school, that's what you're expected to pay. So what you find is a lot of times, especially for low-income students, they just decide not to apply to those schools because they sound too expensive. And what you find sometimes is that these expensive private schools that have price tags in the $57,000, $60,000 range, they also have a little bit of an advantage in that they have very large endowments where they're able to be more generous with financial aid than some of the public schools would be. And so you're really leaving a lot on the table by not exploring those schools. And I'll teach you a little bit of how to choose the schools that will actually be more generous with financial aid than not. And so let's just look at this example. So we have an expensive school and we have an inexpensive school, right? One $52,000, the other one $24,000. But now, because that expensive school was able to give you a grant from their own endowment, not the federal government, not a private scholarship, but from the school itself, they were able to give you a grant of $36,000. Your unmet portion is now $8,500. At the inexpensive school, you may not have been able to get a grant or a scholarship from that school because their endowments weren't as large, or maybe they weren't as generous with financial aid, and now you're ending up having to pay $16,000. And this is a real example. This is actually from one of my financial aid award letters. The expensive school was actually the school I ended up going to, and the inexpensive school was a school that I decided not to go to because they wanted me to pay too much money. And so you see here, I went to the more expensive school. I was a low-income student. They gave me a full need-based grant, which means that they gave me the grant based on my financial aid and not based on my grades or based on some other merit-based characteristic. And so this was an eye-opener for me. I was just like, whoa, I can actually go to this expensive school? And yet the school that I had my eye on and I thought for sure I was going to go to ended up being too expensive. So really think about this. And the thing that you want to look for when you're going on these various school websites or you're trying to find a school that may be expensive and you're like, well, how do I know that they'll give me this $36,000 grant without me applying? There's a little phrase that I like to look for, which is called, we meet 100% of demonstrated financial need. What that means is whatever your unmet need is, after you fill out the FAFSA, after you've filled out your scholarships, whatever that portion of aid is that all of the calculations in math say this is the amount of money this student would need to attend this school, these schools have a policy where they'll pay for you. So the policy is basically, if you get in, we'll make sure you can afford it. And you want to look on the financial aid websites of these colleges, and you want to look for terms that are kind of like this, or you want to look for things that say, this is our average size grant. And so you can get an idea of like, well, if the average size grant here is $10,000 and I'm a little bit higher income, you can sort of get a feel of whether or not you'll be able to afford that school. So do some poking around on these school websites. I would definitely advise you that if you still don't get it, you're going through the website, you still don't have an idea, I would just call their financial aid office and ask them this directly. Do you meet 100% of demonstrated financial need? And if they get into the whole like, oh, well, it depends, and it's not necessarily the school that holds this as a standard. But if they say, yes, we do, it depends on the financial situation, that's fine. It's a really key term. I advise a lot of low-income students to really look at these more expensive schools, not for the fact that they're simply expensive, but the fact that you can sometimes get a higher caliber education from a more expensive school that you originally didn't think you could afford, but you're leaving some on the table. So I have a question that I want to get to. It says, can you tell me the difference between the grants and scholarships? So it's a little bit of jargon. So a grant is money that you don't have to pay back. It can be given to you from the federal government. It can be given to you from your school. It can be given to you from a private scholarship. Scholarships just have a different word. They're technically grants. They're money that you don't have to pay back. But with the scholarships, there tends to be this sort of organized application process. Anybody can give a scholarship. I think there might be some restrictions on who can give a grant. But essentially, they're the same things. They just go by a different name. I separate scholarships out as sort of things that you have to apply for, the sort of a merit and or application process. And grants doesn't necessarily mean that there isn't an application process, but I sort of put that into the bucket of the federal government and the institutional. But it's essentially they're the same for all intents and purposes. And thanks for the question. I appreciate it. All right, so now I'm going to tell you a little bit about community college because that's my sweet spot. That's my heart. That's what I've come to be very fond of. So if there's any of you here that are interested in community college, if there are any of you here that think that college might be too expensive, and maybe you don't know what you want to do yet and you've been eyeing community college, I'm here to give you all the details. So community college is a lot different than it used to be. It's not where the slackers go. There's no horrible stigma. If you go, your opportunities aren't slashed in half. Community college is what I like to describe as a springboard to opportunity or second chance. And what I mean by that is, if you went to high school and you didn't do that well, or your GPA is not where you really wanted it to be, or some family issue happened and you weren't able to perform to your highest abilities, but you know you're capable of it and you really want to go to a certain caliber of schools, community college is your second chance. What you do is you go there for 2 years, you do declare a major, you take general education classes. I'm talking about English 101, calculus, just these basic generic classes, and you do this for 2 years. And you take a little bit of the courses that relate to your major. So I was a biology major, so I took some biology classes, some chemistry classes, some physics classes. And what I was able to do is demonstrate that over 2 years of college, a real college education, I was able to earn a GPA. And my GPA was about 3.6, 3.7. And so I then went and took all of those credits and all of this demonstration over the last 2 years that I'm capable of handling a college curriculum. And I applied to some of the best schools in the country. I have Harvard, Cornell, like the best schools I could think of, because that's what I really wanted to do. I got accepted into all of them. My SAT scores were not that great. My high school GPA was about average, right? But what I was able to demonstrate is, look, I'm proven. I've done 2 years. I've aced this. I've already done most of the work, because a lot of people drop out at about freshman to sophomore year. And so I've already gone through that, right? I've already handled that. And so there's a certain maturity that transfer students demonstrate to some of these higher level institutions that you can do at a community college, and it's kind of hard to get a feel for that as a freshman applicant coming out of high school. So a little bit about community college. It's much cheaper, right? Some other advantages are it's $2,600 a year depending on where you go. I like the opportunity to test out majors. I originally came in as a biology major, then I switched to a biomedical engineering major, then I switched to a mathematics major at some point, and I just kept doing that and taking different classes and trying it out. And so I was doing that paying $30 a credit as opposed to paying $1,800 a credit at the school that I ended up going to. So it gave me that flexibility to really try things out without the panic of wasting time or wasting money. I just explained all of the benefits of transfer. It's a really powerful tool. You are not at a disadvantage because you're transferring from a community college. It is something that I highly recommend that a lot of people look into if you're interested in it. My book is a great resource for that. And then the scholarships. So this was my little hack. I had won a ton of scholarships from high school. And then I went to community college, and community college, again, is only $2,600 a year. So when I won a $10,000 scholarship, guess what happened? After they deducted the amount of my tuition, I got the rest of it back. And so I actually ended up making money by going to community college because it's really, really cheap. So I saved a ton of money. I was able to pay for all of my transportation costs to get to the next school that I transferred to, buy a laptop, and I was a super low income student. Without that, I don't know if I would have been able to do it. And so what it allowed me to do is to focus really on applying for these scholarships, winning these scholarships, keeping myself financially stable while I lived at home and didn't have the luxury of living in a dorm. So that was a big plus for me. So again, if you're interested in community college, there's a lot there. There's a lot to think about. And I highly suggest that you take a deeper look into it. So I'll stop there. We'll go on to the major, but let me take a quick question. Somebody asked, I have a 3.3 GPA and I'm applying to various scholarships like you did. Is there a good chance of possibly gaining some money from these national online scholarships, or should I opt for more local ones? So I'm actually going to leave that question because we're going to get into scholarships in a bit, and so I'll get back to that one. But there's a lot of good questions here, and I'm going to try to finish this up in about 15 minutes so I can get to most of your questions. So let's go back to major. So this is kind of important and kind of not important. I'm going to sort of contradict myself here a little bit, so bear with me. If you go to college and you don't know what you want to do yet, every day that you're in college and you don't know what you want to do yet, you're racking up a lot of dough, right? You're paying a lot of money to do that. And so a lot of the research that you should put into what you're going to major in should really happen right now, right? You should have a pretty strong idea of what you're going to do. It's totally fine if it changes. It's totally fine if you find something else that's way more interesting. But you should go into the college with the expectation of I'm going to study this, I'm going to do these internships, I'm going to get this experience, and then I'm going to graduate and this is going to be my plan. Going to college and saying, I'll just take a few classes and figure it out, or it doesn't really matter as long as I graduate with a degree, I'm guaranteed a job. We already went over that, and that's not the case anymore. And so there's some tricks that you should learn in order to really distinguish whether or not the major that you're taking is going to be a profitable major in the end. And so remember that $338 a month we just talked about. If you graduate and you're unemployed, remember that's a huge burden. So these are some of the fields here that have prospects. Now, this may change by the time you go to college and graduate from college, but right now, computer science, mathematics, engineering, health and medicine, some of these fields that are, I guess, sort of skill-based, right? You learned a lot of math, you learned a lot of engineering, and you're actually able to do things from day one. Some of these other more creative majors like English or law, for some reason, that whole industry is a little weird right now. Historical, cultural studies, communications, things in the liberal arts. Not to downplay the liberal arts. I love my liberal arts students. More power to you. But you're going to have a much harder time finding a job that really requires you to go to college when you graduate with that liberal arts degree. And I want you to think about that, right? So if you graduate with an English major and you don't quite know what you want to do, you might want to do some writing, you might want to do some XYZ, you can write and get experience writing and get exposure writing without necessarily having an English degree, right? So there should be something very specific that you're going to college for. One of the things that I suggest that people do is to check out the Bureau of Labor Statistics. They come out with this report every year that's called the Employment Outlook, right? And you can pick your field, you can pick something that you're really interested in, and just see what the employment outlook looks like. Is this field growing? How many people get hired? Is there a gap, right? Are there less people graduating to fill the roles than there are actually roles, which is great because there are sort of open opportunities for you when you graduate. If you want to do a field that's not necessarily growing or hasn't grown in a while, or there's way more people graduating than there are jobs, you just need to work a little bit harder when you're in college to do the things that you need to do, like getting internships, getting work experience, working on your own projects, generally trying to seem like an awesome individual so that when you graduate, you look way better than your other peers that have already graduated, right? So the moral of this story is either pick a major with a lot of prospects to make your life easier, or if you're going to pick a major that doesn't have a lot of prospects, you better work really hard those 4 years so when you graduate, you actually have opportunities and you don't end up in the 54%. So now we're going to get into the basics of financial aid. I'll try to go a little bit quickly here because I know a lot of people have covered these topics. And so this is what I call the financial aid cycle, right? So the FAFSA opens every year, January 1st, and you complete the FAFSA as soon as you have all of documentation. So as soon as your parents get their tax returns in, as soon as you have all your documents, that should be the day you fill out the FAFSA. The FAFSA then takes all that information and sends it out to the schools that you selected you want them to send it to. And then your school reviews those FAFSA forms, right? They look at all the information and they look at your EFC and all of the data that you put together. And they see how much federal aid that you qualify for. And then your school does a separate calculation on their own using their own math and their own calculations to figure out how much money they want to give you, if any. And then your school ultimately puts both of those together and sends you a financial aid award letter that includes all of your federal financial aid and any financial aid that you get from the school. Somewhere in this cycle, whenever you win a scholarship, you're technically supposed to report it to your school. If the scholarship comes directly to you, and not to sort of like lie or hide anything from your school, but there's a good chance your school is going to reduce the amount of financial aid that you get if the check is written to you and you tell them. So my policy was, I just don't tell the school that the check came to me. And you'll see why in a minute when we talk about displacement and we talk about some of these other issues that pop up with scholarships. If you do win a scholarship and it goes to the school, then that's fine. The school is notified. They can figure out how to adjust your financial aid as accordingly. So I want to separate the two. I want to talk a little bit about institutional financial aid and talk about federal financial aid. So institutional financial aid is money that you're getting from the school that you're applying to or the school that you were accepted to. Sometimes this happens automatically, meaning as soon as you complete the FAFSA and send them the information, there's nothing else that you have to do. Sometimes there's separate forms that you have to fill out. One of them is the CSS profile, which is by the College Board. It almost is exactly like the FAFSA, but it asks a little bit more personal information about personal finances. Once you submit that, then your school has that information and they do the calculations. Other times, there's actually totally separate applications for things like scholarships or grants that the school offers, and you need to be aware of them because they're not always highly publicized, right? So what I like to do is once I have my list of schools that I want to apply to, I go through all the financial aid websites, I look if there's any scholarships, I email their financial aid office to see if there's any scholarships or grants that I need to apply for separately than a normal process. And then I want to know the deadlines for those, right? And so that's one of with institutional financial aid, I remember I got accepted into this school and I called them because they didn't give me enough financial aid. And she goes, oh, if only you would have applied for the XYZ scholarship we offer. How was I supposed to know? She's like, oh, well, it's here at this tiny little link at the bottom of our financial aid website, right? So you don't want to miss an opportunity like that because the school was really bad at marketing it. So do your due diligence, call these schools, figure out if there's any additional financial aid you should be aware of before you sort of wipe your hands clean and wait for that financial aid award letter. Let's see. So this is an example of what a financial aid award letter looks like. And so I just wrote this up, and they all look different, right? They all have different jargons and different pieces of information on it. But what you really want to notice here is that you have grants from the federal government. You have a grant from your institution. You may or may not have this. And you have a bunch of other things that are on there. And then you have this field that says accept, yes or no. You can accept or deny any financial aid that you're given. So if your school offers you a loan and you don't want that loan, you can say no. It's going to affect your financial aid. You'll still be responsible for coming up with that half of the financial aid. But if you don't want to take a certain financial aid that's offered, you don't have to. Like I always said no to work study because it just wasn't my thing. It wasn't something that I wanted to do. And so there's a lot of questions that you should ask after you get your financial aid award letter, which is, can my financial aid be reduced? Is there anything in here that's a one-time fee? The school that I went to gave me a $1,000 travel grant. That's fantastic, but it wasn't going to be there for the next 2 years that I was at that school. And so you want to know that, like, because that's $1,000 that you have to come up with next time. Is any of my financial aid non-renewable? Meaning, is any of this financial aid something that I have to apply for again? Is any of this financial aid something that's just going to disappear? Do I have to do anything to keep earning this financial aid? Especially with things like grants and scholarships from your institution, you want to be very, very clear about the terms of that financial aid. And I think, so this kind of cut off here, so I can't quite see the rest of it, but I think those were all the questions that I wanted to ask. Basically, you want to fully understand what you're getting yourself into and what your financial aid is going to look like next year. A lot of students don't know that there's GPA requirements attached to your financial aid, right? So if you drop below, in some cases it's a 2.5, you may lose a grant or scholarship that your school had given you. That's huge. That's something you might want to know on day one. So I would just circle anything on that award letter you don't understand. Don't feel stupid if you ask a question that sounds really obvious. Just call your financial aid office and ask them a million questions. That's their job. And it's really important that you fully understand the financial commitment you're about to get yourself into. So now for the fun part, which is scholarships. So we're at about 28 minutes now, and so I'm going to do this in about 10 so I can get to your questions. I love scholarships. I advise that every single person here apply for as many scholarships as possible, which I say a minimum of 2 scholarships each month. And the reason why I say that is because scholarships are a numbers game, right? It's just like applying to college. You hear the stories all the time. People with perfect SAT scores, perfect GPAs, basically perfect students, and they don't get into all the schools that they apply to. Why? There's just a lot of other people applying, and maybe you weren't just that impressive, or maybe you didn't catch someone's attention. There's a lot of ifs. And the same thing happens with scholarships. Some scholarships get as much as 250,000 applicants, right? You don't want to put all your eggs in that basket. That's an overcrowded basket. What you want to do is apply for as many as possible to increase your chances of winning one. And so when I said I applied for 350, right, like that may sound crazy, but I don't think I would have won some of the scholarships that I did if I didn't go that big. So really what you should be thinking about is, how many scholarships can I just churn and burn? How many applications can I just get out of the door? And you're going to get a lot of no's, right? You're going to get letters in the mail, those rejection letters that hurt, and it kind of stings and you wonder what you did. But sometimes you didn't do anything, right? Sometimes a judge just didn't really like your background, or sometimes they didn't even get to your application because they had too many. It's just up in the air. So at least at a minimum, do 2 scholarships each month. I always say that it's about a 1 in 10 chance of winning a scholarship, even for the best students, unless you have some kind of or it's an organization that you're a part of, but about a 1 in 10 chance. So if you are applying for 10 scholarships, your chances of winning one are pretty low, simply because there's just a lot of other people applying for them. And so I get a lot of questions that say like, well, I'm this and this person, can I apply for a scholarship? Or I'm this and this person, is there a scholarship for me? And so I'm just going to set it clear that there's a scholarship for literally everyone, right? I've never met a person that wasn't qualifying for at least 10 to 20 scholarships every month, right? And so what that comes down to is you have to look hard enough, right? There's no shortcut here. There's no easy way out. There's no hack, right? You just have to put in the work. Sometimes I spent 2 to 3 hours a day after school looking for scholarships, right? Going through Google, going through the search engines, emailing different schools just to figure out what I could get, right? Finding 350 scholarships is not a small task, so I had to put a lot of effort into it. But I ended up winning hundreds of thousands of dollars. So for me, it was the equivalent of a full-time job, and that's how I thought of it. And so if you can't find a scholarship to apply for, you really aren't looking hard enough. And I know that's not exactly the best answer because you're just like, well, I feel like I'm looking hard enough. And so what I want to say is at least put in an hour, right? When you sit down to do a scholarship, put in an hour. If you can't find anything after an hour of searching and trying, then email me directly and I will help you because I find that really hard. But put in the time and effort. A lot of times I see people sit down, they put in 15 minutes, they get frustrated, and they go and they just assume there's no scholarships for them. There are. And so where to find those scholarships, these are the places that I like to use. So SALT has a scholarship search, and I've actually gone through and removed a lot of what I call the junk scholarship, which are some of those online contests and promotions. So if you use the SALT scholarship search engine, there aren't going to be any of those junk scholarships in there. Those online contests where thousands and thousands and thousands of people apply for, I've removed. So I really like using that one, and I spent a little bit of time going through there. FastWeb is a great resource for scholarships. Scholarships.com is a great resource for scholarships, and the College Board also has a scholarship search. Now, when you sign up for any scholarship search, what I want you to do is create a totally separate email address that you don't mind getting spammed, or use an email address that you don't mind getting spammed, because all of these various websites are free. And what that means is that they don't charge you, but they have to get paid in some other way, and usually that's through advertising. So when you go on the websites, you're going to see lots of pop-ups. You're going to get lots of emails. You're going to get lots of offers. It's kind of a part of the game. So it's not that it's a janky website and you shouldn't put in your information, or you should be scared to put in your information. They just have to make a buck somehow. And so if you create a separate email address that you manage all of your scholarship communications from, it becomes a lot easier to deal with. And so what you want to do on these scholarship search engines is be as broad as possible. And what I mean by that is put that you have a 4.0 GPA. Why? Because these scholarship search engines they're technology just like any other websites are technology. And so sometimes they're not that good at characterizing a scholarship when they put it into their database. And what I mean by that is, let's say a scholarship requires a 3.6 GPA or a 2.5 GPA. There are many times where when I put that I had a 3.6 GPA, I didn't see the one that had a 2.5 GPA. But when I just put a 4.0, I did. It's just how they characterize the information. It's just their database. So what I like to do is be super broad. I do a 4.0 GPA. I say whatever my major is and all of the other majors that are even somewhat related to my major. So I was a biology major. I picked chemistry. I picked health. I picked medicine. Anything at all that was even remotely characterized as science or biology, I put, because many times you'll find scholarships that say must be a science major, and if you don't select science and biology, you won't see the science scholarships. So be very broad with your major, pick as many as sort of corresponds with the majors that you're interested in. The same with your careers, pick a lot of different careers that are somehow related to your career. And that's just for clarity's sake, to make sure that you see these scholarships. And then really go through the profiles, right? Like update the information. If there's usually a section where there's personally identifying information about the student. So they'll want to know if your family has any diseases, if you have worked for any of these companies. Fill out all of that information. It's all very critical, and be very liberal, right? No one's looking at this. No one's going to judge you if you select a few things that you kind of are but kind of aren't. This is just a search process, so be as broad as possible. So how to review a scholarship. So now you got this list of scholarships that you just did from your search engine. You're really excited about it. But like the question that I just got to, which was about these online scholarships, you were trying to figure out whether or not the scholarship is worth applying to. So this is what I typically do. I don't pay attention to the name because the name means nothing. I have a blog post on SALT where I talk about this, which is there's a scholarship called the 100 Black Men of America. The scholarship doesn't require that you're Black, a male, or that you even be a U.S. citizen, right? So the name of the scholarship had absolutely nothing to do with the requirements for the scholarship. So I tend to skip the name. I don't even care what it says in the name. I'm only looking at the eligibility requirements. And so you can find the eligibility requirements on the scholarship's website or on the scholarship application directly. I don't pay attention to the eligibility requirements that they have on the scholarship search engines because they're not always updated and they're not always correct, right? So if you find a scholarship where the description sounds interesting, go directly to the scholarship's website, read the application, and read the website to figure out if this is something you're eligible for. I like to read the organization's description just to see if I can even vibe with these people, just to see if I'm the type of person that they would want to work with. I read the entire scholarship application, and I do mean the entire scholarship application because some people will sneak things in there like must submit a 30-minute video on something, and I'm just not going to do that. And so it's important to read the entire application to understand what you're getting yourself into. And then, and only then, after you've done all of those things, you decide if you're qualified to apply for that, right? Too many times, people look for reasons as to why they qualify. I like to look for reasons as to why I don't qualify, right? I want to see the exact line that says that I don't qualify for this scholarship. Otherwise, if it's vague or if I'm not quite sure, I'm going to go for it and I'm going to apply. So these are the parts of an application, of a scholarship application. You have your application, awards and honors, which is typically the section where you're putting anything that you've done or anything you've won. The essay, which is the most important piece. If you want to learn more about writing a winning scholarship essay, check out my blog post on Salt Money. I go through in depth the exact things that you need to do to write a winning scholarship essay. And regardless of who you are or what you've accomplished, the essay is the most important piece for a scholarship application. I've judged scholarships before. I've written off students that just their opening paragraph had poor grammar or wasn't interesting, right? And scholarship judges do this all the time. So if you're going to focus on anything for winning the scholarship, it would be spending a week or two just rewriting and proofreading and getting people to read your scholarship essay. Letters of recommendation are there. They're important depending on the scholarship. If it's a community college, a community service scholarship and you don't have really strong community service letters of recommendation, it's important, but usually it comes down to the essay, your GPA, and how you sort of match with the scholarship organization. And then there's tons of extras, meaning like you have to submit a video, there's poetry sometimes, there's all sorts of stuff. So this is usually the sort of outline of a scholarship application. Oh, I think this stopped working. There we go. Yay. I'm just going to go over this real quick because I want to get to all of your questions. So scholarship judges are real people. They're not robots. Very few scholarship organizations use technology because they can't afford it or they don't know how to use it. So there's real people sitting at a table having a real conversation about who you are. So you want to talk through your essay as though you're talking to real people. And I know that sounds really weird, but a lot of times we tend to say, if the scholarship prompt is, what do you want to do when what do you want to do with your career? People will say things like, I want to become a doctor. I really like being a doctor. I think being a doctor is cool. That's not necessarily how you would talk to a real person, right? So really think about it like it's a story and you're telling someone a story about your life. It's hard for me to sort of go into the nitty-gritty details of that and give you a sort of a bigger picture, but if you can keep that in mind, like I'm a character in a movie and I want to tell my story to someone and I happen to have 500 words to do so. Be creative, draw pictures, really make someone understand where you're coming from and what you're trying to do and why you're trying to do it. They love stories like this. Scholarship providers, one of their main motivations is to post information about you on their website and to get other people to donate to their scholarship organization. So they're really going to tout you as sort of a poster boy or poster girl. And so you want to be that person to them. You want to market to them that, hey, I'm someone that would make your donors proud. I'm someone that would really help your organization to shine. This is something that's on the SALT blog. This is an infographic that I created that goes paragraph by paragraph of how to write a really good scholarship essay. So I do encourage you all to check this out when you get a chance and check out the blog post that's connected with this as I get much deeper into this. Again, this is the most important piece of winning a scholarship is the essay. Oh, good, we're almost done. So in general, what I want to say to all of you before I start taking some of your questions is that I don't mean to scare you with all this stuff about don't go to college if you don't know, if you don't have it all figured out, and don't take on massive amounts of debt. But we are living in a different time, right? The promise of the four-year degree is not the same that it used to be, right? It used to be so much more, and now it's sort of dwindled. And I think a lot of that has to do with the amount of effort that students are actually putting into their own lives and their own careers, right? College doesn't mean anything by itself. I would work extra hard. I would do whatever you think is best. Spend that 4 years doing things that actually make you grow as a person, as though you're not even in college, right? Because when you graduate, it's not just a degree. They're going to want to see what you've done as a whole. Employers are going to want to see that you have some experience, or that you're interested, or that you're just more than just someone who graduated with a bachelor's degree. So not to scare you, it could be a wonderful experience. I went to school, I went to college, I loved it. I thought I would never, if I could go back, I'd do it again. But I would also do things differently. I would work a lot harder when I was in college. I would do the things that I would do after I graduated, but while I was in college, to ensure that the amount of money that I was paying and the time that I was investing would actually flourish when I graduated. So thank you so much, everybody. I'm going to start answering some of your questions now, so bear with me as I sort of go through this. And I'm going to start from the bottom since they're related to scholarships. How would you recommend organizing the scholarships you've applied for? I totally forget about them. I don't organize them at all, because I would apply for hundreds and hundreds of scholarships, right? I tried creating a file system on my computer where I would save the applications and I would save all the information related to it. But after a certain point, it's kind of useless. So what I would advise you to do is to sort of save the dates, meaning you want to put something on your calendar about when that scholarship was due, so that next year you don't have to look for that scholarship again. You can just know that it's coming up and reapply for it. But in general, if you win it, they'll notify you. If you don't win it, they won't notify you. So there's really there's no real reason to organize those scholarships. But what I do in terms of when scholarships are due and managing that calendar is I don't care about the due date. I do it as soon as it hits my desk, right? If a scholarship is due in a month and another one's due in 2 weeks, they're both getting done on the same day, right? So I like to sort of be more proactive about it, and just as soon as I find it, apply for it and get it out the door, so I can spend more time looking for more scholarships and less time sort of trying to manage all the scholarships that I have. Inevitably, though, like, you might get overwhelmed, right? If you have 10 that are due in the next 2 weeks, there's no way you're going to get them all done in a day. But do whatever works best for you. There's no real secret to doing that. As long as you have the scholarships, you're managing the deadlines, you're already well above the rest. So I would say don't focus too much on the organization of it. Just try to keep yourself in line. Let's see. Sorry, I got to go through some of these. So someone said, how can I contact you if I have questions? So my email is Diane, D-I-A-N-E, at transferbootcamp.com, Transferbootcamp, bootcamp, Transfer Bootcamp. Transfer Bootcamp is a technology that I created to help community college students transfer, and so that's where you can reach me. SALT also has a community where you can talk to lots of experts, including myself. So if you want to sign up for SALT, go to their community. Any questions that you have, we're very active in answering them. You can even tag me directly, and I'm very, very quick to respond because I love getting questions from you guys. So those are 2 ways that you can contact me. Also, can you ever get too much scholarship money? For example, what happens if you get a full ride? What happens if you get other small scholarships that apply towards your education as well? So yes, it depends on the school that you go to. So there's a term that's called displacement. And what displacement means is the school will reduce the amount of financial aid that you get depending on the size of the scholarship. Some schools have very aggressive displacement policies, meaning some schools reduce the amount of scholarship money that you get by 50%. Some reduce the amount of scholarships that you get by 100%, meaning if you win a $10,000 scholarship, they just reduce the amount of financial aid they give you by $10,000. Now that doesn't sound fun, and I don't agree with it. Other schools are way more lenient, and so the way that it typically works is that if you accept federal financial aid, you can only get as much financial aid as your calculated cost of attendance. And it's a really complicated way of saying the federal government doesn't really like when you get too much money, way more money than what you need to go to college. And so a lot of times you can work with your scholarship provider to find ways around that. I won a very large scholarship at one point, and my school wanted to displace it, meaning they were just going to reduce the amount of financial aid that I had by the amount of that scholarship because I had way too much financial aid. What I was able to do is call the scholarship provider and say, my school is going to try to take away all the money that you gave me, and we found some really creative ways around that problem. So yes, you can win too many scholarships, but it's a good problem to have, and usually your scholarship provider will help you to figure out a solution so that you don't end up getting sort of robbed by your school. I hate displacement. So if you plan on winning scholarships or you have some scholarship money now that you'll be transferring to your school, I would ask directly and upfront, what is your displacement policy? What percentage do you displace, if any? And use that to understand, well, if their policy is a 50% displacement policy, it means all of the scholarships that you're winning, they're just going to cut in half, right? They're just going to basically make them half as valuable. And that's not something you want, and it's not something that a lot of schools are willing to negotiate. So if you know that up front, you can select schools that will be more lenient about giving you all of your scholarship money that you deserve. Let's see. What would you do if you had a good GPA, average SAT score, but cannot apply for the FAFSA? I have thought of improving my SAT scores and getting higher help from school. You mentioned something about not telling school if you get scholarships. Should we not report colleges about the scholarship that one's wins? So that's two questions. Let me address the first half. So if you have a good GPA, average SAT score, but cannot apply for the FAFSA, I'm going to assume that you may be an undocumented student. And so this is a problem that a lot of undocumented students have. What I always suggest for the undocumented students to do is to apply for the scholarships that don't require U.S. citizenship. You can go to community college for 2 years, and during that 2 years, you can rack up as much scholarship money as possible. You can up your GPA. You can just work really hard at trying to get a little bit of a fund going so that when you do apply for a school for the next 2 years to transfer, you now have some money coming to the table that you can use to get in to pay for that school. And you have more flexibility in terms of choosing a school that will give you more financial aid, or maybe if they don't give you that much financial aid, is at least cheaper so you can apply the scholarships you've won to that school. Now, what I mean by not telling the schools about the scholarship is that if someone writes you a check for $20,000 and it goes to you, and it's in your name and not in your school's name, you don't have to report that to your school. They suggest that you do because they'll alter your financial aid. But a lot of scholarship providers will tell you don't do that, right? Because you're just doing yourself a disservice. So that's what I mean by that. Not that if you win a scholarship, you should lie to your school by any means, but a lot of times you don't have to tell them that you've won these outside scholarships. When a scholarship comes in and it's in your name and your school's name, even if the check comes to you, you have to give that check to your school. Otherwise, there's no way for you to sort of reap those benefits. Like, it's in your name and the school's name, and it needs to be deposited in your account at that school. So those ones you do definitely 100% have to tell your school about. The other question, how do you apply for special circumstance? So I'm assuming you're talking about special circumstances for the FAFSA. Special circumstances for the FAFSA are just that. They're special circumstances. Again, I actually have 3 blog posts up on the SALT blog, which is blog.saltmoney.org is how you can get there directly. You can find my name on the right-hand side. Just click my author name and you'll see all of my posts. Special circumstances are just that, special circumstances. And even if you think you qualify for special circumstances and you check that box in your FAFSA application which says, do you qualify for special circumstances, it's up to something that's called professional judgment, which means the financial aid officer at the school that you're applying to uses their professional judgment to decide if you qualify for special circumstances. So one thing that you can do is if you haven't applied to the school yet, you can really research what special circumstances are by reading my blog post and also going to the FAFSA website. It's actually studentaid.gov, and learning about what special circumstances mean and what are the sort of nuances of that. And if you think you qualify at that point and you're sure that you want to qualify for special circumstances at that point, there is a box on the FAFSA that you can check that says I qualify for special circumstances, which means that there's some documentation you don't have to provide at that time. And then the school gets your FAFSA information, they contact you, and they try to get as much supporting documentation of why you think that you qualify for those special circumstances as possible. So be ready to prove it. It can't just be hearsay. A lot of times people think that I'm an independent student because I don't know where my father or mother is, or my mother and father don't contribute towards my college education financially, so I'm an independent, I should qualify for special circumstances. That doesn't work. So really read about the special circumstance rules. If you do think that you qualify, check the box and then work it out with your school to figure out if you can make that work. This person says, where can I find a list of available scholarships? There is no magical list. If there was, our job would be a lot easier. So some of the things I like to do is go onto those search engine websites, the ones that I listed. Let's see if I can go back so you guys can have that for a second. Go to these scholarship search engines, gather your own list, make your own list of scholarships. I also like to use Google. So when I Google something, I will go scholarships that are due in 2014, scholarships for women that are due in 2014, scholarships for people who live in Boston, scholarships for people who live in Florida, scholarships for females, scholarship for nurses. I just spend all day on Google just searching. And then what I do is I just look through the first 5 or 6 pages of Google results and I just see if there's anything interesting there. If you want to just look through lots of lists of scholarships, I would just Google scholarship lists and just go down and check out those search results. Another trick that I like to do is I type in scholarship application 2014.pdf. And what that brings up in Google results is just a list of scholarship applications, right? The actual PDF document scholarship applications. So I just start clicking on those links, review the scholarship applications in the same way that I mentioned in this screen, which is read the eligibility requirements, read about the organization, make sure that I qualify, and if I don't, move on to the next link. If I do, great, I just found the scholarship. And the reason I do that is because scholarship search engines don't always have every single scholarship there is in existence. I always go into it with the mentality that scholarship providers are really, really bad at marketing themselves. They have no idea how to use the internet, and they have no idea how to let you, someone who might be qualified for the scholarship, know that they exist. So you've got to be the detective. You've got to put in the extra work to find them. So using those search engines, using Google, sometimes you can search on Facebook. That's the last resort, but a lot of scholarship organizations have Facebook pages and only Facebook pages. They don't even have websites. So sometimes you can search for scholarship foundations in Facebook and just see which ones come up. And it's, again, once you've gone through sort of the surface level, once you've done all the easy stuff, you have to get really creative about how you start to find these harder to find scholarships. If you win a scholarship, for example, a small non-renewable $1,000 scholarship, where does the money go? An escrow account or a check directly to you? It depends on the scholarship. Some people write you a check directly, and some of them send it to your school. Some of them send you a check that's in your name and the school's name directly to you, and you're responsible for giving it to the school. If you have any issues with that, for example, if you win a scholarship this semester but you want to apply it for next semester, you have to work that out with the scholarship provider and ask them if there's something creative that they can do. Another question, do you have any estimate of how soon you would hear back from the university or college after the FAFSA has been submitted? So financial aid award letters, there's usually that date that you get once you get into a school, of the day that you have to send them whatever the deposit is to say that you're going to go to that school. And you have to get your financial aid award letter before you do that. So usually it's about a week or 2 before that form is due. It really depends on the school. Some schools with early admissions, they'll send financial aid award letters earlier. But usually it'll take 2 to 3 days after you complete your FAFSA to get something called the SAR report, which is the student aid report, and it's just a summary of everything that you've done in your FAFSA. And has a little number at the end that's called the expected family contribution, and it's in quotes EFC. There's a lot that you can read about that number in terms of what it means. 0 means super low income, it's the lowest EFC possible, meaning your family isn't expected to contribute anything because they can't, and it goes all the way up. And so you might be confused about that number, you might not understand what it means, but that's what the school sort of uses to adjust your financial aid. So 2 to 3 days after the FAFSA, you'll get that form. And then 2 weeks or so before you have to let the school know about your decision to attend is when you usually get your financial aid award letter. Do not, if you don't get your financial aid award letter before that due date, before the day that you have to let the school know and give them a deposit telling them you're going to go to that school, you can't do that. Call them and say you need an extension, because you can't go to a school if you don't know how much money they're going to give you. Another question. Will someone have a better chance of getting a scholarship if he or she is involved in sports in the club but has a 3.0 GPA compared to someone with a 4.0 or 3.9 that's not involved in sports or clubs? So this is where the scholarship tricks come in. So I always say it doesn't actually matter what all of the things together are, right? So meaning you can have a 4.0 GPA, you can participate in sports, you can have a perfect SAT score, write an awful essay, and still not win the scholarship, right? You can have a 2.5 GPA, participate in no sports, but have an incredible story and maybe have done some interesting things in your life and actually wrote a really good essay, and you have a better chance of winning that scholarship than that 4.0 student does. And so that's why I tell people to focus on the essay. I've helped people win scholarships that have the lowest GPAs, right? I've helped people win scholarships where they have no extracurricular activities. There are so many different scholarships that are available, right? There's billions and billions of dollars worth of scholarships out there. So what I mean by there's a scholarship for everyone is the scholarship that would have taken that 4.0 student over you, that's just one scholarship. There are tons of others that would rather you and your story and what's unique about you over that 4.0 student. So what I would do if I were you, and I have about 4 minutes, so I want to get this answer as much as possible. What I would do if I were you is really focus on your essay and that story. Really think about answering the questions of why do I want to do what I want to do, right? If you want to be a doctor, why? What's motivating you? What happened in your life? Did something happen in your family life that's motivating you to pursue that major? Is it just something that's coming internally? Do you find it really interesting? Really think about what makes you the most unique person possible, right? And a lot of times, don't be afraid to be really personal about things. For example, I had a friend who, or not a friend, a client who had some abusive family issues, right? And she was really uncomfortable because she didn't want to make her essay turn into a sob story. But because of her abusive family situation, that was a whole reason why she was trying so hard to get into college and to move away from college to sort of build a life for herself. That's a much more powerful story than I just want to be a doctor because I'm interested in it, right? So involve your life story. Really think about the things that have impacted you as a person. And then you can sort of work on GPA, work on extracurriculars. It always helps, but it's not the deciding factor. I'm going to tell you now that as long as you meet that threshold GPA to qualify for the scholarship, it's all going to come down to that essay. It's all going to come down to whether or not you're the kind of person with the kind of story that those scholarship providers want to market and want to tout around and want to be really proud of. Let's see, lots of questions. I'm really excited. Okay, so one of them is really long, so hopefully I can get to that later. All right, what if you're thinking about attending community college for your freshman year, but the local community college does not offer your major? Is there another community college around that might? I think, so it depends. Some community colleges don't have majors at all. There's something called a, oh, I'm going to regret this, but it's just basically like a general AA degree and a general Associate of Arts degree, which is a 2-year degree where you don't have to declare a major. What you want to make sure that you're able to do is that you're able to take the right classes that you need to take for your major, right? So one community college may not offer biology, for example, or they may not offer philosophy as a major, but they'll have philosophy classes and they'll have biology classes and they have all of the pieces that you need to put together to fulfill your prerequisites for transfer. The website, that the transferbootcamp.com, my app, if you come in and you tell me your community college, your intended major, and then the schools that you're interested in transferring to, we actually do all that work for you. We tell you exactly the classes that you need to take. So what I would do if I were you is I would look at their course catalog and to see if they have courses that are related to your major that you can put together to make that major. Another quick point, I only have a minute left, so I'll just make this quick. If you're going to go to community college, do the full 2 years. Don't do 1 year and then transfer. There's a lot of reasons why One being there's a lot more space for juniors transferring in than there is for sophomores transferring in. That's because in the junior year, that's when kids tend to drop out. That's when kids tend to study abroad. And all of these spaces open up on these campuses. The second one is if you're going to go to community college anyway and you're going to save the money, you might as well save the money for 2 years as opposed to doing for 1 year. There's a lot more disadvantages to doing only 1 year at a community college and trying to transfer than there is doing 2. So I almost always tell people to do 2 years and then transfer. So that's about it. I really hope that I can get to all of your questions. They're fantastic. The SALT ASA has a SALT booth open where they're taking questions and answers, and so they'll be able to answer any questions that you have that I may not have been able to get to. So it's the American Student Assistance SALT booth. And then as soon as I end this presentation, you're going to get a survey. If you answer that survey, you'll be entered into a drawing to win one of 3 50 Amazon gift cards that American Student Assistance is giving away. Again, thank you so much. I gave you my information on how to reach me. You can ask the people at the SALT booth how to reach me, and check out blog.saltmoney.org. Thank you so much. Have a great one.